Is going on, everyone? I want to welcome Justin LoFranco to the Mission Driven Made podcast. Thanks for being on the show today, Justin. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me, man.
And so before we get started with some of your accomplishments and what you're most known for, which is finding the morning chalk up, I kind of wanted to start with painting the picture of who you were, kind of your upbringing, and then we'll kind of zoom into different parts of your life and go from there. So where you're from and what kind of led you into the path that you chose.
Well, I'm from Temecula, California. It's kind of when I lived there. It was this kind of small suburban town, Southern California in the Inland Empire. Not altogether too special. It's kind of known for wineries. Grew up there, went to high school there. Went to college in California, and then afterwards I taught English for summer overseas in Italy, and kind of just had a cool post-college experience. I got some real life experience out there in the wild, and then I moved to Washington D.C. Pursued a career in politics that took me from the U.S. House of Representatives to some presidential campaigns and some other campaigns kind of around the country. And I spent 7 years doing that. And then I moved from that into transitioning into creating the morning chalk up and taking the skills that I learned while I was in that career and translating that into kind of a publication and, having a heck of a time doing it for the last 6 years.
And growing up, did you do CrossFit, or were you into being really physical like that, or sports or anything?
Yeah, I played basketball competitively, not only high school varsity basketball, but kind of club basketball, AAU. So traveling around the Southern California area, playing in tournaments, off-season tournaments, summer league, summer ball, et cetera, all that kind of fun stuff. And then I found CrossFit when I was in college in 2006. A buddy of mine introduced me to CrossFit, and it didn't really stick for me then. I was like, it's cool, but like I kind of like doing this other weight training thing, in the gym, and I'd see him over there doing his workouts. But then in 2011, or end of 2010 or early 2011, I was training for a marathon, and I'd seen Matt is his name. I saw Matt, with some photo videos of him competing, and I was like, oh man, that sounds pretty cool. And maybe I could supplement my marathon running with some CrossFit. So I started doing it on my own, like many people did back then. And I was in the basement gym of the House of Representatives, kind of just off in the corner,
No way.
doing burpees and air squats, and trying to do Helen on a treadmill and other funny things like that, just kind of looking like a weirdo. But it's what I had at the time, and I didn't really know about joining an affiliate yet at that stage. I was just kind of cherry picking workouts online, CrossFit.com, other local gyms that I knew that were around, and putting some stuff together. And that was a little bit more than 10 years ago. I started my journey with CrossFit.
Yeah, we'll come back to all the CrossFit stuff in a second, but I wanted to ask about how you like growing up in Temecula. I actually have family in Menifee. My sister-in-law and nieces live out in Menifee, which is 10-15 minutes from there.
Yeah, probably a little bit longer than that. Once you get on the freeway, probably 10 or 15, but it takes a little bit now because of traffic to get out.
Oh, right.
To get out there. But yeah, growing up in Temecula was awesome. When I moved there in 93, it was a small suburban town, with only about 25,000 people that lived there at the time. And it was pretty sparsely populated. And then that was kind of the beginning of the massive growth period. And now it's like 100,000, people more. So it's like 125,000 or something like that live there. So now it's a sprawling kind of center of that part of the Inland Empire. Very popular place for people to live and work, et cetera. But it was definitely a lot quieter when I was growing up. We didn't have a mall yet. It was, you had to drive like 30 or 40 minutes to get to the closest mall, and place to go shopping. So things have obviously changed a lot, but I loved it there. It's a great town to grow up in. People were great. Schools were fantastic. The place is actually a very beautiful city, with a lot of wineries and a lot of open land. Then a little bit less now.
Yeah, Temecula I always thought was really nice, but I did notice how many people started moving out there. I used to work for San Diego Fire Department, and there was a lot of people that would commute all the way from Temecula to San Diego, to
Yeah.
work their shifts because it was more affordable and it was really nice. But then the prices kind of started shooting up as, more people started going out there.
Yeah. The price definitely started shooting up. I remember like pre-crash when my parents still lived there. This was 2006, 7.
Yeah.
Houses or track houses were going for $500,000. And like, whoa, that's like absurd. Because I remember when we moved there, our house was like brand new and it was like 125,000. This was obviously this was 26, 7 years ago. So it was obviously a lot different back then. But it definitely has changed. The commute wasn't as long as San Diego back then either. It was the same distance, but there were far fewer cars on the road trying to go down to 15. So things are a little different now. It's not quite. I mean, you could commute to San Diego if you really wanted to, but you'd be getting up at like 4:30 in the morning to get on the road by 5 and hopefully get to work by 6:30 now, or it used to only take you about 45 minutes to get down there.
Yeah, I have my sister-in-law, her husband, he leaves or wakes up at 2:30 a.m., the ones that are in Menifee, to commute into San Diego. And he works kind of in like the northern part of San Diego. Yeah, the 15 it is rough there, at least like right over the hill around Temecula. It gets really rough over there for sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And how did you get into, I heard you say teaching overseas. So how did that come about?
I had a friend in college who found this program to do these summer camps in English in Italy. And I was like, oh, that sounds awesome and super cool. So I applied to get a teaching role too. And you basically, you went up, you got instruction for a week or so, 10 days in San Remo, Italy, which is over on the West Coast near Genoa. And they gave you like their curriculum and how they go about doing it and structuring their classes and teaching you their methodology. And then you get sent to summer camps to do English speaking summer camps. So I did one camp in and around Milan suburb. And then I did another one up in the Alps, up in the Dolomite area of Italy. And so you did these teaching English summer camps, was just kind of cool. And I had a friend that just told me about it. And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. I don't know what I want to do for work yet. And let's go have some fun. That sounds cool. It's a great way to go see a part of the world, and you get to live with the host family too. And so you get to kind of integrate with them and get used to sort of daily life in another country, and learning to work through language barriers and stuff. It was really fun. Very rewarding experience.
And when you were there, was there a point where you thought this would maybe be your career, at least in the teaching field?
No, I wasn't meant to be. I wasn't meant to be a teacher. I loved it. I had a great time doing it, but it was a very cool experience. Not something that I was thinking I was going to go down from a career path-wise standpoint.
Yeah,
that was definitely not my calling, and definitely I'll realize that a lot more afterwards. I was just thinking this is a great opportunity to use something that obviously native speaker, college educated, fit the bill. Thought, hey, this is a cool opportunity to go do that. Teach some English to some Italian kids, have some fun with them, play a lot of games, and yeah, that was it.
And so once you finished school and you finished teaching over there, what was kind of the next part of your journey?
Well, it took me back to the United States. And I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. This is in the height of the sort of financial crisis. This is 2008 is when I graduated. So this is summer of 2008, or the end of summer 2008, heading into the fall season.
Oh no, literally right in the middle of the crisis.
Literally right in the middle of the crisis. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Job opportunity was really pretty poor. Some of my peers had decided to go into law school or pursue a graduate degree, kind of to stave off their student loans. And then also because it just wasn't a lot of opportunity out there. I wasn't sure what the right fit for me was, and I did just want to hop and do another job. So I actually went back to Europe and I did some more traveling with people that I'd met when I was there. And some of them have various jobs, or they were stationed in other countries. Some of them were actually English teachers of other countries that were doing this as a summer gig. So I made some friends, and I went and I saw some other parts of the world. I traveled to a lot of different countries in Europe, and just saw things and had great experiences and a fun time, and made some more friends. And then when I came back in right around November, I had decided I wanted to pursue a career in politics. I studied poli-sci. I did an internship in Congress when I was a junior in college. And I said, that was a really fun experience for me. I think I'd like to go back and do that again. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to go back and pursue a job. And that's exactly what I did.
And so people definitely have their own probably thoughts and ideas of what it'd be like to work in Washington. Can you tell us from an insider's perspective what it was like, at least for you?
Well, folks always ask me like, oh, it's a show a lot like what it was like working in politics and in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, yeah, kind of. I mean, here's where they get it right. Here's where they get it wrong. This is what I'll tell you by and large. It's that it's very chaotic. It's very fast paced. The intensity level is extremely high. The pressure is very high. There are 500 people that will apply for your job that are probably more qualified than you are. Just getting an interview feels like a win. And it's a fun place to work. It's a fun place to work if you're into pushing yourself really hard. Like you feel motivated by pursuing excellence for yourself, and if you like politics, and the seat of power in the United States is Washington, D.C. So it's sort of a little bit of a aphrodisiac to a certain extent, being around these powerful politicians, and being at the seat of legislation and law creation process, all the news channels you could ever want, being there for the State of the Union, things like that, and behind the scenes and the creation of that is kind of cool. And so for a young person, a young professional, it's obviously doesn't make, you don't get paid a lot, but get to see a lot. And I even had the opportunity to go overseas with some congressional junkets to get some foreign affairs experience while doing those jobs, which is also another cool thing. You will see and do more cool things working in Congress than maybe anywhere else, but it is chaos. And you work a crap ton of hours, and the pay is very low and the expectations are very high, and you've got to learn how to swim with sharks and swim fast. So to a certain extent,
like
that made me that it sharpened my skills and honed my professional skills to a large degree. Do that job while you're young, though, because it's not going to be quite as rewarding, I think, when you're older. But that was just my experience, and I loved it. I had a great time doing it.
And were you on the media team?
Like media team as in when I was in politics?
Yeah. What did you do specifically? Like, what was your role?
So I wasn't legislative. I was in comms. So handling incoming press inquiries for your member of Congress, drafting press releases, writing op-eds, working on communication elements for back home for constituents, and communicating policy and what the congressman's doing, et cetera. So definitely the communication side. So that'd be like one way of putting it is on the media team.
And if you can kind of take us through maybe a crazy day that you would have there, because I know you said it's long hours. So from when you get there to when you go home, what would that look like?
Well, I'll give you an example. So I worked for a while on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and we're a chief investigative body of Congress and primarily investigating the executive branch. So during hearing days, it'd be a little bit chaotic. You're up at around 6. Hearing is probably going to start around 9 a.m. It's usually a typical start time for a congressional hearing, which can last for 2 to 3 hours. So there was one time I was working as a deputy clerk, as well as a deputy press secretary type role. So I was both comms and as a clerk. And for a clerk, it means you have to prepare all of the written and reading materials for every member of Congress on your side. So you have a Republican clerks and Democrat clerks. So for all the Republican members of Congress that are on that committee, you have to prepare all of the written materials relevant to this hearing. So we would have these high profile hearings, 12, 15 TV cameras there, table full of press and reporters. So not only am I distributing press materials for the press, so that could be like statements, that could be like a copy of legislation that's being discussed, that could be like a copy of investigative documents that are pertinent to that particular congressional investigation and the hearing that we're having, but then also preparing all of the books. These are binders, literally. And so you're up, till like 8 or 9 at night. You're still in the office, literally.
Oh man,
printing out piece by piece by piece with changes that are coming, changes to the opening statements, changing to additional addendums to this documentation so that members can be briefed and they have the understanding of what's going on. For each member has a specific binder. So I'm preparing all of these binders for like 20 something members of Congress, then having stacks for press briefing so that the press, when they arrive, they can pass these out to each individual outlet. So you got Wall Street Journal, you got Washington Post, you got Law Times, you got pick one, Fox correspondent, you got CNBC, CNN if it's economic, or CNBC if it's economic, CNN for regular news, and Fed Times if it's more federal related, you name it, right? So you have all these things, you have to keep them completely organized. So your organization skills have to be unbelievably detailed. And then at the same time, you're working to really late changes that are coming, live changes. Hey, we got to rip all those out. 28 books, start up, all those opening statements are gone. And that's kind of the chaos of it. So things happen, and communication at the speed of the internet is extremely fast. And it's not just because the internet's writing stories, it's because the game is changing quickly. And we now might have access to information we didn't have previously. So that has to be reflected in our most up-to-date briefing documents. The briefing documents that's sitting in front of the member of Congress right now has to be up to date. So we might even have to get up early and make it a late minute change to these binders to make sure that they have what is necessary to ask questions. And then, all in between. So there may be specific questions for specific members of Congress. And so we have to update those too, make sure each binder is accurately reflects the strategy that member has for their line of questioning to a witness, et cetera. So those were always chaotic days, long hours. Yeah. And there might be 2 hearings in a day. There might be subcommittee hearings going at the same time. So you might have like 3 hearings simultaneously, and you're like, this is nuts. And those were definitely high stress days, required marshaling all of your skill to execute and follow instructions and not miss any pieces of the puzzle.
Was the culture very like formal, like yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am type of thing? Or how was the culture?
No, not really. I mean, maybe some offices had that kind of thing, but no, there's no sort of formalized culture that's particularly I don't know how I'd say it. No, I wouldn't say so. I don't think there was. It was sometimes there was a lot of yelling.
Yeah.
This is a high pressure environment, and decisions sometimes are made on the fly and mistakes happen. But no, there's no formal like Mr. LoFranco, Mr. X, Y, and Z. With the congressman, yes, or another elected official. There's a sort of formal way of addressing them, which is respectful of the office and the position that they hold. But no, not to one another. In fact, it might even be less formal without coloring between the lines too much. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, gotcha. Did you see people get burnt out a lot with that fast-paced, high-pressure environment?
Yeah, it's not for everybody. I mean, usually, young staff assistants will come on, 22 years old, right out of college, and the early shelf life is like 1 to 2 years. Where it's kind of clear that that's cool. They had a great experience, super rewarding that they did it, but they don't really want to make a career out of it. They're like, that was cool. And some get burnt out over time, and they could be there 8 to 10 years and eventually get burnt out. It just depends on the nature and trajectory that you take. If you go down the campaign route, it's an entirely different environment. If you're in the policy route and you end up on a committee, that could be a very lifelong job opportunity for you to become a policy expert there. And the pace on that is much more reasonable. I was on comms, and comms tends to be kind of a live fire exercise where you're always taking or incoming fire or returning it. So that the pace of that is naturally a lot more hectic, and it doesn't always abate. Sometimes just it's part of it. With anything like that, there's going to be burnout.
Right.
We see it all the time. We see people just going, it's not for me. You're like, okay. Usually you figure it out pretty quick. You make it in like 12 months and you're like, I don't make any money and I don't really love this. And maybe I'll think about taking a job downtown. And that's usually what they do.
So right when you were in the thick of it, with your career there, did you think you were going to stay there and keep promoting, or, move departments in there? Like, did you think your career was going to be there, or did you know you were going to kind of go off into the entrepreneurship route?
No, I definitely was pursuing a full-time, lengthy career in politics.
Yeah.
My ultimate goal, I wanted to be digital director of the White House. Um, and I sort of positioned myself for an opportunity to get to that. Ultimately, I was working in the 2015 cycle, and I was working and running all the social media channels and digital content for the governor of Wisconsin. He was running for president, and he lost in that campaign. I went into it feeling like I was still going to stay into politics. I kind of finished it, and I said, like, I've enjoyed this, but I do think I want to pursue some other opportunities for me. I think that there's other things out there that I want to explore and I want to experiment with and try. And I'm going to go down that route. So that's kind of how I approached it. And it was at that point that I did make a transition out. But going into the job that I was in for 9 months, I said, yeah, I know what I want my goal to be. I know what my goal is to get to this position. And, that's just kind of where I'm moving.
Gotcha. And then one more question about your time there. So behind the scenes or behind the camera, generally speaking, would you say Republicans and Democrats get along with each other? Because, it could obviously get flared up in the media a bit. Sure. How is it actually when you're there?
Well, I think that changed over time. I had many friends who were Democrats, guys and girls that I hung out with, played on softball teams with on the National Mall. I'm a Republican, they were Democrat. And, I even knew somebody I worked for actually long time ago now, married a Democrat, who worked on the Hill too. And they both worked for different members of Congress. On a staff level, there's a lot more civility there and a lot more interaction and engagement on a staff level when I worked there. I couldn't speak to now because it has been a number of years since I've worked there. And the changeovers, in 5 or 6 years, you're talking a whole different swath of individuals there that didn't work there.
Right.
When I was there. So the changeover has been very significant. I would assume, though, it is relatively similar, that cross-party engagement and hangout is fairly, I'd say a lot more common than the media would portray it, especially on the staff level specifically. I mean, you guys go to the same happy hours, you guys go to the same hill bars after work and blow off steam, and the engagement and interaction is just naturally quite often that actually happens. So I had a lot of friends who were on the other side of the aisle. And I think that was similar to other people's experiences as well.
And when you decided that you were going to take on other things, did you know this was going to be morning chalk up at the time, or did something else come first?
No, I didn't. I didn't know exactly what it looked like. I was going to pursue entrepreneurship and sort of take it as it came. I knew that I had an interest in doing it. I knew that I had the ability to create something, and I wanted to create something. So I started taking on some roles into digital consulting and working with some former contacts and building together a repertoire of work. But I didn't know it was going to be morning chalk up yet. It took me a couple of months, and I started having this idea that was in the back of my head. It just kind of kept growing a little bit, and then I was like, okay, I feel like I've got something there. There's something forming. I started really trying to put some effort and energy into building and to putting it down on paper, and I kind of went with it. So it took a little while. It took actually quieting my mind enough to look at the landscape and decide what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And once that happened, that's when the idea popped in.
Awesome. And I do have a good amount of listeners that are CrossFitters. So for the ones that aren't, could you tell us what morning chalk up is? And then if you could kind of go into the beginning stages once it really started to get going, what that looked like for you.
So the morning chalk up is essentially a morning newsletter. At least that's definitely what it started as, a morning newsletter, condensing and aggregating everything that's going on in this giant CrossFit world, putting it together into a newsletter. That's a 3 to 5 minute read every single day. And that's what we are still today. We do have multimedia channels that we publish on, but our core product and who we are is still the newsletter. And that's what we publish. And the beginning stages, that looked a lot like trying a lot of different things and knowing what we were going to be, which is exactly that, but not exactly sure how to how to grab all that content and what it was supposed to look like in the newsletter. That was the experimentation phase. So I started with a very simple template of kind of created some buckets, and then I filled them in each day, and I just kind of did that every day. I did that actually 7 days a week. And then I realized that was maybe a little bit too much. So I tapered that down to 5 days a week and created kind of more sustainable product. And really what we did is we just said, look, CrossFit community is really various, diverse, and broad all across Europe and South Africa and Asia and Australia and North America. We're going to figure out what's going in all those areas. And we're just going to try and put it all together for somebody to read. And reading it will make you more informed about what's going on in the community that you care about, a sport that you like to watch. And that was the specific purpose and goal. And the more we accomplished that goal, the better we got at it, the larger our audience grew, and the more people started tuning into that, which was cool.
And did you have contacts in all these different places, or did you have to kind of go out and create them to get all these different sources of news?
Man, I didn't know a single person.
Wow.
You know, I didn't know anybody at all. I started this literally from scratch with nothing, knowing no one.
Wow. That's I think that's really good to hear, because a lot of people, especially if they're looking to transition into something new or start something like you did, knowing that you started from nothing, that's very powerful. And from there, how did you go and get these contacts across the world?
You know, this is where politics really came into handy, is that we're used to doing two things very specifically. Number one, we're used to working without budgets. You don't have media budgets to go spend and, go promote your product and go do advertising. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
You're working with taxpayer money. On the campaign side, you do. Still limited, but you do. On the congressional side, when you're working for official government, you don't. That's taxpayer money, and it's not an approved expenditure. So you got to get creative. The second thing it taught me to do was learning how to marshal together my best efforts into meeting people, figuring out who matters in this industry, and then going and making and developing the relationships with that, just like any contact you would have. Figuring out which reporters were writing about CrossFit, touching base with those people, figuring out what the beat was, figuring out who's managing which athletes, figuring out which athletes are making which moves. That's just that's baseline business intelligence. It translates into any industry, no matter if it's CrossFit or politics. But I learned it in politics. Knowing what the story is before it comes out is an extremely difficult thing to figure out how to do. But once you learn how to do it, you will know it across any industry if you put together the effort to get there. It's the same tactic. It just is a different industry. So it took time, and it's kind of like it's kind of like a buried boulder that you really want to roll downhill, but you got to figure out how to unbury it, which is going to take you a heck of a lot of time. But as you get closer and closer and closer and closer, the snow kind of starts moving out of the boulder real fast. And you're like, okay, now things are moving. And then all of a sudden the boulder's moving. And you're like, now we're picking up a ton of speed, right? It took a long time. And then at the beginning, the slope is very, very, very slight. And once you finally got the darn thing moving, you're like, okay, well, it's not moving very fast. And then all of a sudden it starts moving, and then it moves a little more. And now it's moving fast. So it trickles down. Once you open up the floodgates there, you make a contact, you solidify it, you make a new one, you do another one. You have 10 now. You reach back to the first one, you reach back to the second one, third one, all into the 10th one. Now you have 20 because they've introduced you to new people. And you're now just kind of moving this system around and continue to gather information and become a center of commerce of information. And once you become a center of commerce for information, people start coming to you. And this is in the news environment, obviously. So if you're selling t-shirts or creating an apparel company, that's not exactly the same thing. But there are other ways that this spirals downhill and into it in a positive way, and you pick up momentum. And that's kind of how I approached it, was from a sort of a political intelligence and political comms strategy. We have distribution lists for like people that we know who's coaching who. Like we keep track of that information. We don't just, shoot from the hip here. You take a very smart, targeted approach to growing, and that's how at least that was a strategy I used to get there.
Yeah, I always wondered that. I used to coach CrossFit part-time, and every single morning, the first thing I would do for a couple of years is read the morning chalk up. And I remember thinking, how does this guy have this information every day? Because, this wasn't some short 20-second post. You could tell. And this was before I knew anything whatsoever about business. And I was already like, this must be a lot of work to be able to put this together, especially 5 days a week. And
Yeah.
at least I didn't see anyone else doing that. I could be wrong.
Still, no one's doing it.
So you're the go-to still for all this.
Still the only ones producing a daily newsletter like this. There are other writers that are writing about CrossFit. They're usually behind the eight ball a little bit. Whereas people are coming to us for information and coming to us to break stories. They're usually getting it afterwards. And that's just because of the aggressive nature that we've taken to be a leader. Yeah. And you do that for long enough and eventually people just start coming to you.
Gotcha. Wow. And how about any obstacles with business that you were facing? I know you're talking about all the stuff in the beginning, but I just think it's a really important point to talk about, knowing that it probably wasn't smooth, like you were saying, from, day one. So kind of an obstacle you had to overcome within your entrepreneurship and what that looked like.
Oh man, well, obstacle. Where do I start? Obviously financial is a huge thing. We started this with no money at all, with no financial backing, no investor money whatsoever. And that kind of like is a huge obstacle. It's like, all right, so where are we going to get a paycheck? Right. And that's like a very realistic obstacle to overcome. It's not just like how do you get paid as an individual, but how do you scale, right? How do you add new people to the roster? How do you pay for talented folks to join your team, right? So like those are massive obstacles. That's a massive obstacle to overcome. It took a long time to sort of amass enough money to really feel comfortable paying people and figuring out how to do that and then scale it. Media is a tough environment for scalability. Monetizing media can be very challenging. So that was one. Another one was just being somebody that honestly had never ran a business before. Frankly, my training and upbringing is in comms and media, specifically the internet media, which is not niche anymore. That's how most media is consumed, but does not exactly prepare you for running and executing a company with multiple staffers and a strategy, et cetera. Right. That doesn't put you necessarily in the driver's seat when it comes to how to make those decisions and which are the right decisions to take. That came with a lot of experimentation, talking with other people in my business network contacts and figuring out what they think and what is the right direction for these things and these elements, et cetera. So, that took a lot. It took a long time to get there and to develop that. Those are two big barriers. Is number one, just not knowing how to, not having any money. And number two, not knowing how to run a company, just not having ever done it or being in a startup. You're in a totally different environment.
Do you do like affiliate marketing on your newsletters?
Very little.
Very little. Gotcha. How many people do you have on your team?
Oh, like 12.
Oh, wow. 12 people. And those are all full-time employees for you too?
Nope. We have a lot of them are contractors, writers with other gigs who write with us as well. Some full-time staff, tech staff, business, and the business development side. And then the largest portion though is the stable of writers that we have. So we have a pretty broad team of writers who touch various parts of the industry, which are all very talented. Who don't write full time, but they write regularly. So they usually have some seeing 2, 3, 4 stories a week, So that's almost once a day for some of the riders. And then some have less than that, a little bit more infrequent. Some are professional riders in other areas, or creating content across a stable of different pieces. And some are, some have been with us almost 3 years now. You've been creating great stories and contribute to the team and everything we're doing.
And do you personally or people on your team go to all the big events like the CrossFit Games and all the sanctionals and everything?
We've gone to many of them. Not everybody goes to every single one, and we don't send a person to every single one, especially with how efficient it is to cover some of these events online. We just frankly can produce a lot of content without physically being in that space. During the sanctional season, during the old season format for the CrossFit Games season, we did travel to a ton of them, an unbelievable ton of them. We were trying to make a name for ourselves. We were hustling super hard. We were going out there trying different things and trying to be the sort of tip of the spear when it came to covering the sport and making sure that everybody knew, if you have a question, go to Morning Chalk Up. You're going to get an answer from them. They've got it. They're right there, solid with it, and they're leading the charge and stuff. So we definitely spent a lot of time traveling to those events. I can imagine we'll travel to fewer of them because the season is structured a little different. There are a lot more events on the same weekend, so naturally it's just going to be a little easier to cover this from a digital streaming environment.
And what did you think of the CrossFit Games this last year?
Well, Games was great. The fact that it was able to go on in person with a full field. It was fantastic to see that. 2020 was obviously a kind of a strange year, transitionary year too. The games took on a very different form, and this year was kind of its return to normal. Not quite fully there, but from an athlete and competitor landscape perspective, it was kind of a return to normal. We had a full field of really talented, really fit athletes out there competing. A lot of the events were very fun to watch. It was great being able to see a live in-person competition as well, being there too, seeing kind of the magic of Madison and those kind of great sports moments that are created only by that in competition live experience, people battling it out. It was great to watch that. At the end of the day, I'm still a fan of this sport. I like watching it. I like the athletes competing in it, which is fun. And I really enjoy that element of it. So those things are really cool. And it was good to be able to be back.
Is Tia ever going to lose? Because I'm telling you right now, unless she gets injured or she retires, I don't think she is going to lose. And normally I think every person is beatable, but she dominates. So it's not even fair. It's like a different league from her to the second place person.
Right.
I feel like she's not going to lose unless those two things happen.
The fan in me wants to see her challenged.
Yeah.
And somebody to take her on and beat her, and then her come back for that next season, right? Because it creates a great sports story. As an analyst too, it makes for a great sports story. Right. But if I'm giving you my honest opinion, the answer is no. I just don't. I think that she could compete until she was 35, and I don't think that she would. I think she would naturally sort of be hitting the ceiling of what she was capable of doing physically in comparison to the other athletes who are younger. And I think injury would naturally come from the wear and tear of the games on her body. So yeah, I think there's a kind of a shelf life where all of a sudden it kind of, maybe goes to 3rd and 5th and then 10th. If she's still competing another 7 years, 35, 36 years old, sure. Yeah, I could see the natural degradation of the body just flowing in that direction. But in her prime years, and she's in her prime years right now, no, I don't see her losing unless if something were to happen as an injury, which would be very unfortunate. But her legacy is she's in the driver's seat. No one's taking it away. I think the only opportunity is Tia messes up. No one's going to cause it. She's an unbelievable athlete who is. It's really.
It'll be 6 next year for her, right? If she wins again. 6. Okay.
6.
It was pretty cool seeing it. The young buck went on the men's side. I wasn't at all thinking that was going to happen. I thought Pat was going to get it this year.
Yeah, a lot of people rooting for Pat. Medeiros, I don't think Medeiros surprised a lot of people. Well, it depends on who you talk to. So I don't think Medeiros surprised a lot of the insiders who follow the sport, looking at his capabilities, his hunger, his drive. He's a natural athlete. I think if he had wound up in second, nobody would have been surprised. I don't think anyone was picking him for beyond fifth to 10th. I don't think anyone was really looking at him in that direction. That he ended up on the top of the podium really wasn't that surprising. Vellner was a guy that a lot of people said, hey, absolutely could be his year. He's a phenomenal athlete. His mental game is extremely strong. He's a seasoned competitor. Fikowski, same thing too. Fikowski's also a brilliant athlete. He's done a great job year over year at the games, except for the last 2 years where both him and Vellner had some trouble with the format. But no, Medeiros, he's got to defend it though. He's got to come back. So he did an amazing job. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's had 2 great years. Let's see if this is an era or it's just a games. I would love it to not be an era. I would love to see a great games competition that was super close, super tight. Like I said, as a fan, as a sports, and from telling sports stories, that's fun. That makes for great sports storytelling, and it'd be cool to see a little bit of trading. Dynasties are cool, but they're not as fun to watch.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Do you keep a pretty good relationship with a lot of the athletes as well, not just their coaches?
Oh yeah. We talk really regularly. We see them behind the scenes a lot. Develop relationships with them by being on the road at these various competitions, traveling overseas and being with them. When you're in a country that doesn't speak English, you're with like 3 or 4 American athletes or North American athletes. In Brazil, let's just say, you have a tendency and an opportunity to kind of stick together a little bit more. You might go out for dinner after this or that, or go out for drinks. Not usually, well, that's not till after the event, the competition, but you get to know them a lot better, which has been cool. And that was a really cool and unique opportunity with the sanctional season that was so international, was the ability to kind of feel like you're on the road, touring a little bit, like doing the big worldwide CrossFit tour with the athletes, and like, hey, you going to this event? Oh, cool, man. I'll see you there in like 3 weeks, and that's in another totally different continent sometimes. And that was kind of a cool byproduct of opening up the season structure.
And as far as Morning Chalk Up, is there any other future projects or things you're working on that you can share with the listeners?
Not really. We're a dynamic publication. It's constantly evolving and looking at our opportunities to cover this community and this sport. So that's one way of saying yeah, and one way of saying no. We're not doing a lot of big high productions that have defined other media enterprises and stuff. We are primarily informing the community and keeping them up to date on everything that's going on that matters. And that's kind of our mandate. And that's what we've carved out inside of CrossFit. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So what that exactly looks like is it takes a lot of different forms and shapes. Sometimes that takes us down a slightly different path, but that's what we're going to continue to keep doing. Sometimes it'll take a little different shape, but same mission.
Fantastic. And one question I like to ask just about all of the guests is, we talk about being mission driven on this podcast, obviously, which means essentially taking action. So you obviously lived a very mission driven life, even from seems like high school years. So why did you choose to live such a mission driven life?
Well, I'm somebody who's just fundamentally motivated, self-motivated, where I love taking on challenges that are unique that others don't always do. My own personal life, one of my biggest hobbies is mountain climbing. It's an opportunity for me to marshal my physical, mental, and then technical skills together into one area and get to the top of the mountain quite literally. That's sort of a very fun thing. And it's those micro accomplishments and micro missions that you put yourself on that I think ultimately lead to a very satisfying, very fulfilled life. I've never been somebody that's like, I don't see it as work. I read like aggressively, and I'm like, it's almost like as if I'm in school. Like I might read like 3 books in a month, that are like thick. And I'll go in waves where I read more and then a little bit less. I'll read something in the vicinity of like 20 to 24 books a year, which is on the average of about 2 per month. And they're like thick books, classic literature, or other things that I pick up that I'm interested in. And it's like, that's satisfying for me. It's not just checking things off a list, though. It's educating myself and, you know, pursuing things that I'm passionate about and figuring out how to grab as much out of it as possible and walk away at the end of the week saying, oh man, I've accomplished so much. And I've gotten to do so many great things, and I've set myself up to pursue those things and to be able to do that. And that's satisfying and validating. You're put on this earth for a finite period of time. How you choose to seek adventure is up to you. But let me be clear, adventure is always hard work, no matter which avenue you go down. And that's adventure in the outdoors, or it's in your own life, or it's in the relationships you pursue with others. They all require work.
100%.
And I think when you see it as the life adventure that you set yourself down, it shouldn't ever be thought of as work. But let me be clear, you're going to work your ass off doing it.
Yeah.
And if you love it, then I think you're going to have a great time doing it, and you're going to have a very full and fulfilled life. Hopefully you find the right balance in that mission. Politics maybe doesn't have enough of that appropriate level of balance, but that's why I say do it when you're young. But live a full life. And I think that's part of the reason why I think that's part of the reason why I do it.
And where can our listeners connect with you or the Morning Chalk Up?
Well, pretty simple. Go to morningchalkup.com, hit that little subscribe box, subscribe to our newsletter. We have a great mix of fitness and fun and relevant content, as well as a motivational quote of the day, keeping you on your toes and coming back for more. You can obviously reach us on Instagram, instagram.com/morningchalkup. Connect with the team from there. We tag all of our riders in those posts, follow those individually, and their journeys and what they're doing and what they're creating. And if not there, just go to our website, morningchalkup.com. We're producing tons of content daily. And, if anything comes up you want us to write about, let us know.
Fantastic. And I will make sure to link all those in the show notes for the listeners. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into the Mission Driven Made podcast. If you found value in the show today, subscribe to the show and then take just a couple seconds and leave us a 5-star review. And Justin, thank you for taking the time to be on the show today and providing so much value to the listeners. We really appreciate it. And until next time, everyone, stay mission driven.
Thanks, Jacob.
All right.